Ever since Chapter 2, when Spampton told us about someone named Mike, and we saw that smiling television at the very end, we all expected the villain of Chapter 3 to be a manipulative, purely evil mastermind, pulling the strings of the entire story. Instead, we got Tenna, a TV with the showman's complex and way too much energy, who becomes the central focus for almost the entire chapter. But why? Well, beneath all his cheerfulness and desire for adventure, Tenna is hiding a deep fear of being abandoned and forgotten, something he himself acknowledges when he recalls the past, and how Kris, their family, and the holidays all slowly stopped watching television. But Tenna comes from a dark fountain created by Kris, and we know that dark fountains are manifestations of their creator's feelings. So yeah, Tenna is so much more than a TV. He's more than just an antagonist. He is the character who marks the turning point of the story, signaling that from here on out, things are about to get much, much darker. He represents one last look back at the past before the future and the prophecy become inevitable. And that makes him incredibly important. To truly understand the reason behind all this, and to understand the character and his motivations, we first need to talk about a simple TV. Tenna, also known as Mr. Tenna, or simply Kris's TV, is the eccentric antagonist many of us were anticipating in Deltarune's Chapter 3. Following in the footsteps of charismatic characters like Queen from the previous chapter, Tenna is introduced as a fun, over-the-top, and playful figure who, for a good chunk of the chapter, is dedicated to cracking jokes and organizing games with the protagonists. It's not until later that his true intentions are revealed. Tenna doesn't just want to entertain, he wants to retain. His desperation to keep the Lightners playing with him is born from something deeper. As a television in the real world, the passage of time and technology, Kris's own growth, and, most importantly, the rift between the Holiday and Dreamwar families have left him utterly forgotten. In essence, Tenna is a character defined by abandonment, someone terrified of becoming irrelevant and being thrown away. This arguably makes him one of Deltarune's most important characters, not for his comedic moments, but for what he represents within the game. This all ties into the fact that Deltarune is a sort of alternate universe to Undertale, a reinterpretation, or perhaps even the original idea, that revisits meta-narrative concepts while also introducing a new central theme: escapism, and the nostalgia that fuels it. Throughout the first 2 chapters, the protagonists go on adventures in fantastical, colorful worlds filled with lighthearted humor and almost no real consequences. But starting in Chapter 2, this illusion begins to crack. Characters like Noelle, Susie, and even Birdly can't stop talking about how wonderful the dark world is. Noelle perceives it as a dream where she can be free, where everything is solved with magic. At one point, she even feels a wave of nostalgia for the past she longs for, with Kris, Asriel, and Des. However, Susie embodies this escapism most of all. At the end of Chapter 2, she goes so far as to suggest bringing the Dark World characters into the Light World. Rouse could help with homework, and Lancer could sleep under Kris's bed. To Susie, it sounds like a perfect plan. However, Chapter 3 marks a tonal shift. It takes all those previously introduced elements and begins to dismantle them. Susie fantasizes again. Wouldn't it be great if Rouse could watch movies with them? Or even better, go to the festival together the day after. It's then that Rouse, with stark frankness, shatters her illusion. He suggests it would be better for her to focus on her real life, that the Dark World is just that. A fantasy. The places, the adventures, the bonds, they're all just an illusion. Its inhabitants are merely objects and toys. Susie refuses to accept it, and right at that moment, the character of our focus today bursts onto the scene, Mr. Tenna. Tenna is a somewhat dated, 3D rendered humanoid character looking like something out of a PlayStation 1 cutscene, with an old television for a head. Although he has no eyes, he doesn't need them. His huge smile and long, pointed nose convey all of his expressiveness. He is a charismatic, exaggerated, and energetic host who seems to genuinely enjoy entertaining his audience. His outfit consists of a striking red suit with 2 coattails, a long yellow tie, black pants, large cartoon-style white gloves, and yellow shoes. Throughout the chapter, Tenna transforms from a charismatic host trying to entertain his contestants to revealing a deep-seated insecurity and a profound fear of abandonment. His desperation to hold the audience's attention leads him to manipulate, deceive, and ultimately confront the protagonists. He even collaborates with the Roaring Knight to avoid being forgotten, hoping to regain the lost attention of Kris's family and stave off irrelevance. Interestingly, replaying Chapter 3 reveals many details, both small and large, that build Tenna's personality and narrative role. Let's break down how this all unfolds. To start, it's quite significant that his introduction occurs just after a verbal confrontation between Rouse and Susie. In that argument, Susie flatly refuses to accept that the Dark World is just an illusion. To her, the objects that come to life there are as real and valuable as anything in her daily life. And then, as if in direct response to that claim, Tenna appears, a character who perfectly embodies this idea. He is an old television who refuses to accept that his time has passed, still trying to capture the protagonist's attention through a never-ending game, as if he were still essential to the Lightners' lives. Tenna is the living representation of nostalgia and a bygone era, a fact well reflected in his design, especially the old boxy television for a head. It's a detail many might overlook, perhaps because of how iconic that TV design is, but it's a model nobody uses in real life anymore. This is reinforced when using the check action in combat. If you have no special items equipped, the text reads, "Don't you think it's time for a new TV?" And throughout the chapter, it's confirmed that this is an old TV that Toriel plans to replace. Tenna himself denies this repeatedly with lines like, "I'm not broken, I don't have screen burn, I'm fun," hinting that he is not just old, but also damaged in some way. Furthermore, his entire introduction has a VHS aesthetic. Later, during his own battle, Tenna even says there's nothing like VHS tapes, reaffirming his obsession with the past and his inability to adapt. In his introduction, he also delivers a seemingly absurd line, "You can't get this from an egg." What at first seems like a typical, nonsensical Toby Fox joke actually has more to it. We later discover that Tenna approached Spamton to learn his secrets to success, and by extension, how to use the internet and modern technology, in exchange for making him a TV star. But after being unplugged by Spamton's assistant, Spamton fell from grace and abandoned Tenna. Since then, Tenna has felt scammed and betrayed. Therefore, his egg line is likely a reference to Spamton's peepus, a distorted way of saying, "You can't find someone like me on the internet." His clumsy phrasing even makes sense, given that Tenna doesn't really understand how modern technology works. He even refers to Spamton as that spammy mailman, unaware that email doesn't require mail carriers. Later, when his behavior starts spiraling, Tenna hosts a self-congratulatory quiz where one of the correct answers is literally, "Television is better than email," suggesting he doesn't even grasp that email is part of the internet. In any case, after an eccentric and over-the-top introduction, Tenna immediately forces the group to become contestants on his game show. TV time with Mr. Aunt Tenna. Susie initially refuses, which visibly saddens Tenna. However, Rousey, still hoping to have a good time with her and Kris, manages to convince her. Perhaps as a darkener, he can't watch movies with Susie on a real TV, but he can participate alongside her on one. This idea cheers up both Susie and Tenna, who immediately kicks off the first game. After the trio picks their names, Tenna introduces the first round of the show, in an attempt not only to entertain them, but also to make them remember the past. The first game is a bootleg version of the first Legend of Zelda, called The Legend of Tenna, mixed with Deltarune's signature bullet hell mechanics and small trivia contests. It's funny because as this section begins, Tenna remarks something like, "This world is so real. For a moment, you'll forget it's not." But we instantly see that the real world he's referring to is a rudimentary, outdated game with limited graphics. When it starts, Susie complains that the graphics are trash, to which Tenna enthusiastically replies that they're top-of-the-line technology. This first minigame is clearly Tenna's attempt to revive one of Kris's childhood games, clinging to that memory. There are multiple minigames like this throughout the chapter, and they all seem to be a chaotic mix of nonsensical elements. But upon analysis, we see that each one is designed to revive a nostalgic fragment of the past. The first game is a primitive Legend of Zelda. The cooking minigame is a nod to the cooking shows Kris's mother, Toriel, used to watch. The music game is based on December Holiday's favorite, not-so-family-friendly music channel. Tenna even mentions her, "Oh, Kris, do you remember December? Oh, that little musical prodigy?" What's more, it's interesting that during each of these segments, Tenna makes comments directed at Kris, explicitly reminding them what the games are based on. It's all to make Kris feel something and reconnect with him through their shared past. Even the trivial contests scattered throughout the chapter reflect these longings. A clear example is when a question asks for Kris's favorite food. When you answer pie, Tenna says, "There's nothing better than eating pie with the family while watching Christmas specials on TV." These kinds of lines reinforce the idea that for Tenna, television wasn't just entertainment, it was the emotional bond with the family. In contrast, questions that don't revolve around him or the past are treated with disinterest and ignorance. For example, when asked for Lancer's name, Tenna has to read it from a cue card, clearly not caring. When the first game ends and the credits start to roll, Tenna interrupts them with a spin kick and announces a second round, just to keep the show from ending. After a quick sponsorship segment, Tenna leads the group to the green room and then leaves. Before the second round begins, Susie approaches Tenna, who is talking to someone through his antennae, receiving messages. Noticing her presence, Tenna abruptly ends the conversation and asks what she needs. Susie, honestly, thanks him. She says this whole experience has cheered Ralsei up, that she's had fun too, and that it has helped distract her. Tenna is deeply moved by her words, responding with something like, "I haven't felt this way in years," with more than a single viewer. Susie mentions that Kris had fun too, though Tenna seems doubtful. Before she can explain further, the scene cuts. The next game is about to start. This whole scene reflects how Tenna, deep down, and despite the bad things he does later, had good intentions. He wanted to entertain, to make people laugh, to be useful again. This is especially true for Susie, who, throughout the chapter, remains emotionally torn by what Ralsei told her about the Dark World's nature. It also reflects Tenna's insecurity about whether Kris still appreciates him. After all, it's been years since the TV was last used. In the next round, there's little to highlight besides the introduction of Shutta, a mini-boss whose design resembles someone about to take a picture. Tenna comments something like, "Make memories come alive with photos." You can make home videos too. It's very subtle, but it's another allusion to capturing memories as a way to preserve an illusion, as if that could stop things from changing. It also highlights the use of an old-fashioned camera. Nowadays, no one uses one of those for photos, as that function is built into our phones. The same largely applies to home videos. After completing the second game, Tenna seems sad to know it was the last round of the show. However, during the credits, he reveals that the group has unlocked a secret round. Ralsei initially refuses, but Susie agrees to continue a little longer, seeing how devastated Tenna is. This cheers him up again, but Susie isn't entirely convinced. Later, she decides to talk to him again, and catches him in the middle of another call, where Tenna explicitly states that if Susie found out the truth, it would all be over. She makes her presence known and interrupts, but the scene turns awkward. Between the tension and exhaustion, the group decides to leave. At this point, both Susie and the player are visibly tired of Tenna's games. It's a brilliant move by Toby Fox to emotionally integrate the player into the narrative, communicating to both that Tenna is wasting their time, and in truth, Tenna is simply terrified of being forgotten. After unlocking the passage to the right of the green room, the protagonists continue down a hallway, bathed in blue hues, filled with stacked TVs, displaying only static or snow. The background music is melancholic and nostalgic, and as they advance, Susie continues to process the idea that the Dark World might just be a fantasy. This scene visually represents Tenna's mental state, a tower of powered-down, obsolete televisions, waiting to be watched again. It's a powerful image that encapsulates his fear of oblivion. Perhaps when Tenna claimed he wasn't broken, he was referring to actual damage to his screen, a defect causing the picture to appear with snow or interference, just like the TVs in this hallway. Then, the group finds Toriel sleeping inside a gachapon capsule. Seeing Tenna approach, they hide behind it. When Tenna arrives, he seems relieved that Toriel is still asleep, confessing he doesn't know what he'd do if she woke up. He whispers that he's sorry for holding her prisoner, but that he has to do it to avoid being thrown away. He also reveals a key detail. Toriel was the last person to turn on the TV. Tenna raises her up as if she's a grand prize of the show, until he discovers the group hiding. The screen cuts to technical difficulties, and when it returns, everyone's back on stage. Tenna presents the next round as if nothing happened, with the idea of taking them to TV City, an area that even includes a nod to the cars with legs from Chapter 2. But this time, Susie has had enough. Fed up with his games, his jokes, and the fact that he's holding Toriel captive, she demands he release her. Ralsei agrees, although more delicately. He says they have to seal the fountain, and that all of this is outdated. Calling him outdated is a direct stab at Tenna's ego. He responds with fury, trapping everyone in personalized gachapon capsules and deciding to play the third game by himself. From that point on, the show spirals. The trivia becomes an endless glorification of television. Lines like, "I'm not broken, I don't have screen burn, I'm fun," reinforces his self-deception and refusal to accept the television's own deterioration. Combat can only be resolved with act, with no real violence, to maintain a family-friendly tone between him and the protagonist. The idea of family is a recurring theme here, and one dialogue in particular is a bit confusing. I'm sorry about the pipes. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but you know, every pipe goes somewhere. They had to go somewhere. Wait, no, not another battle, please. This is likely a reference to Chapter 2, where it's hinted that Kris threw a bath bomb into the toilet, ruining the house's plumbing. Since Tenna is Kris's TV, it's easy to assume that he's witnessed all the family disputes and fears them happening again. This all leads to a very interesting piece of dialogue. Tenna says the group needs him, so you can forget everything for a moment and look at me again. As if somehow Tenna senses that Kris is suffering and all they need is a distraction with him. In this section, there are also modified versions of physical challenges, but they're no longer functional. Anything to keep the game going over and over until the protagonists learn how to have fun again, even if they have to be forced. Panicked, Tenna completely loses control, mistreats his employees, and becomes lost in distorted memories. He recalls how Kris and their brother Osriel used to spend so much time with him, watching cartoons, playing video games, sharing moments. Confused and hurt, he asks why they don't do that anymore. When he learns that Osriel went off to college, he can only say, "You can learn anything from television," another line that denies the passage of time. The team manages to escape by using the act option on a zapper enemy and activating an off button option. The mechanic gives them time to flee, but it also reflects the exhaustion of Tenna's own workers with his behavior. Scared, Tenna starts to lose even more control. He mistreats his employees, forcing them to search for the lighteners while the protagonists traverse a stage that becomes increasingly empty, desolate, and lifeless. Only piles of dust and floating platforms remain for the group to walk on. The atmosphere is cold, with snow falling, as if the dark world representing the television is as obsolete as Tenna himself. Tenna's attitude grows increasingly bitter, desperate, and delusional, causing even his closest employees like Mike to abandon him. Many of them literally turn to stone. The curtain is about to fall. As the group prepares to seal the dark fountain, Tenna stands in their way one last time, begging them not to stop, to keep playing. Susie, fed up, asks why he's so insistent on continuing the show. Tenna doesn't answer her directly. He just says, "Kris, they know why." Tenna confesses that Kris's family and the Holiday family used to gather to watch him, to see the Christmas specials together on TV. He was part of the family home, but over time, the families grew apart, technology advanced, people grew up, the world changed, and eventually, they stopped turning him on. No one watched. No one remembered, until one day, the roaring night found him. The night promised that if he kept Kris, Susie, and Ralsei busy, he would have the whole world watching him again. Tenna accepted because he didn't want to be thrown away, and in one last, desperate attempt, he tries to start another round of the show. But Susie, furious, interrupts him, initiating the final battle. During the fight, Tenna keeps commenting on things we already know. Toriel is considering buying a new TV, maybe because Tenna no longer works well, or simply because he's too old. In one of his lines, Tenna says they don't need HD. He also says he watched Kris grow up, reinforcing his role as a witness to the protagonist's childhood. The combat culminates when the group shoots at Tenna's head until the stage begins to glitch and collapse. Defeated, Tenna shrinks down, sunk in despair, terrified of being forgotten forever. Ralsei is the first to approach, and just as he preached at the beginning of the chapter, convinced that darkness exists only to serve a purpose, Ralsei tries to console Tenna by telling him that he did bring joy and smiles to Kris's family, and that although darkness eventually become obsolete, they shouldn't make the lighteners worry about them. But that only makes Tenna even sadder. Then, Susie pushes Ralsei aside and takes the floor. She tells Tenna he doesn't have to accept being thrown away because she herself knows what it's like to feel like a broken toy. She talks about how every time she made a friend, they'd end up using her for a laugh and then leaving. That she always felt like nobody really wanted her. But ever since she came to hometown and Torio encouraged her, her life started to change. All she needed was to find the right people. And Tenna needs them too. She and Kris promise to help him find someone who wants a TV. This fills Tenna with hope, and he is genuinely overjoyed. And, well, we know what happens next. But don't worry, the promise is kept. If the player recruits all the Shadow Guys, they repair Tenna and reveal how to help him find a new home. This ultimately leads to Kris and Susie giving the television to none other than Mettaton, It's a fitting conclusion. If there's anyone in the Undertale/Deltarune universe who could take care of a talking TV with an identity crisis and a need for an audience, it's undoubtedly Mettaton, the showman extraordinaire. Both obsessed with the spotlight, with being seen, with the glare of the cameras, they bring Tenna's arc to a perfect close. Tenna is, without a doubt, one of Deltarune's best characters, and probably the most memorable, goofy but deep antagonist so far. His importance lies not in his charisma or eccentric design, but in the fact that he embodies one of the game's core themes: escapism through nostalgia. From the beginning of Chapter 3, Susie refuses to accept that the Dark World is just a fantasy, trying to cling to the idea that these worlds and their inhabitants are real and meaningful. It is precisely at this moment of denial that Tenna burst in, a character who represents that very same need for escape, being literally an old, obsolete television who refuses to accept that his time is past, clinging to the illusion of still being watched and loved. This theme is also reflected in other characters. Asgore, for example, is anchored to the past, trying to reclaim a life that no longer exists, and rejecting his present as a divorced man. Kris, for their part, seems to be actively resisting the future that has been laid out for them, and since Dark Worlds are influenced by the will of their creator, it's not a stretch to think that Kris's nostalgia and pain are at the heart of this new Dark World. When Tenna mentions worriedly that Asriel went to college, or when he makes subtle references to family conflicts in Kris's house, it all points to him replaying memories, images, and traumas from the past. Even Ram, another character, questions Kris for creating this Dark World, knowing their mother is trapped inside and that the darkness are turning to stone. Is all of this just for fun? The answer, perhaps, is that just like Tenna, Kris is trying to recreate the past to avoid facing the future. From a symbolic perspective, Tenna is also interesting. After his downfall, the game's tone changes drastically. The story becomes darker, more serious. It's as if the game is telling us that the time for Dark Worlds as places to simply play and unwind is over, and that from now on, the consequences will be real. And it makes sense. The character who represented nostalgia as a form of escape is gone. His disappearance marks the end of childhood, of artificial comfort, of entertainment as a refuge.